If you are a Christian, you should not vote for Kamala Harris. And I'm going to prove to you why. My name's Terrence, I'm a coach, and I help men become the heroes God has called them to be for themselves, their families, and for our nation. If you are a Christian and you're considering voting for Harris, that means you do not know Harris's actual policies and how these policies affect your family, our country, and how they relate to the Bible. Harris's policies on border and immigration, gender identity, abortion, free speech, and support for Israel are all against the Bible. Let's dive in. Border and immigration. Harris is actually the border czar, which means she was assigned the task of taking care of the border. Let's take a look at Joe Biden giving her this responsibility and her accepting this responsibility.
I've asked her, the VP today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks stemming the migration to our southern border. But the vice presidents agreed, among the multiple other things that have in the meeting, and I appreciate it, agreed to lead our diplomatic effort and work with those nations to accept the returnees and enhance migration enforcement at their borders. She's leading the effort because I think the best thing to do is to put someone who, when he or she speaks, they don't have to wonder about, is that where the president is? When she speaks for me, doesn't have to check with me, she knows what she's doing, and I hope we can move this along. So, Madam Vice President, thank you. I gave you a tough job, and you're smiling, but there's no one better capable of trying to organize this.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and for having the confidence in me. And there's no question that this is a challenging situation. As the President has said, there are many factors that lead President to leave these countries. And while we are clear that people should not come to the border now, we also understand that we will enforce the law, and I look forward to engaging in diplomacy with government, with private sector, with civil society, and the leaders of each in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to strengthen democracy and the rule of law and ensure shared prosperity in the region. We will collaborate with Mexico and other countries throughout the Western Hemisphere.
She was absolutely in charge of the border. The Bible says this about borders and boundaries. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, he separated the sons of Adam. He set the boundaries of the peoples according to the numbers of their children. Deuteronomy 32:8. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times of history and the boundaries of their lands. Acts 17:26. Your children will return to their own territory. Jeremiah 31:17. Borders and boundaries exist, and they are good. They help separate, organize, and protect the people of a land. When Harris was campaigning in 2019, this is what she said she would do if she was in power. And this is exactly what she did when she became the vice president.
CNN's Aaron Burnett was stunned to learn that Kamala Harris is on the record as having supported publicly funded gender transition surgery for detained illegal migrants. Here was Burnett reacting to a report by CNN's K-File.
This questionnaire is really an interesting snapshot in time of that 2019 Democratic primary. Kamala Harris was trying to get to the left of Bernie Sanders. She was trying to get to the left of Elizabeth Warren, and you really see that in a lot of these answers. And I want to walk our viewers through a little bit of what she said. Let's just take immigration and look at what she said here. She said on immigration, she made this open-ended pledge to end immigrant detention. She said she supported taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She also said she supported
Taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries for detained migrants. She actually said she supported that.
She both wrote and answered in the affirmative when she was asked this. Oh. And she said she also supported it for federal prisoners. Now, she also pledged to slash immigration detention by 50%, close all family and private facilities, and decrease funding for ICE, and then end ICE detainers with local law enforcement.
I mean, these are things that, it would be hard to think that you would come up with taxpayer funding gender transitions for detained migrants.
This is what her policies have given us.
And I see a couple cop cars with lights on. I see yellow tape. and immediately my heart drops and sinks to the bottom of my stomach. My daughter's hands and ankles were both bound. She was strangled to death, left with no pants. And I know in my heart, she fought incredibly hard. She was not going down without a fight.
We begin with two men we're learning are charged with capital murder tonight, accused of killing a 12-year-old girl.
Police say these men strangled her before dumping her into that creek. Both men were in the country illegally.
Apprehended, then released by Border Patrol less than 3 weeks before Jocelyn's death. The men accused of killing Jocelyn Nungare are affiliated with the gang known for brutal violence.
Kamala Harris was in charge of immigration and our borders. If we had better border policies and not open borders and not these catch and release policies, I truly believe this all could have been prevented. Under her being vice president of this country, my daughter's life was ripped away from her. She had her entire life ahead of her.
Happy birthday, dear Jocelyn.
My daughter is 6 feet in the ground based off of policies that she allowed to keep. Kamala Harris did have one job, and she not only failed, not me, she failed my daughter, she failed Jocelyn. She was only 12.
This is Harris being confronted by Brett Baer about some of the women who were killed directly because of her border policies.
Jocelyn Nungare, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred.
Let's take a look at what she thinks about undocumented immigrants.
I know what a crime looks like. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal.
Two Venezuelan migrants are under arrest in Houston, charged with murdering 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare.
I know what a crime looks like, and I will tell you, an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal.
Days ago, another undocumented immigrant from Ecuador was arrested in New York City, accused of raping a 13-year-old girl in broad daylight.
An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal, and we have to correct course on this conversation in our country.
An undocumented immigrant from El Salvador was arrested in Oklahoma. Police say he raped and murdered Rachel Morin, a mother of 5 from Maryland.
I know what a crime looks like. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal, and we have to correct course in this conversation. An undocumented immigrant is not a criminal, and we have to correct course on this conversation.
How about apartments being broken into?
And new at 10, it's scenes coming out of a movie as the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua are seen breaking into apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. This is according to our sister station in Denver. There you can see the group well armed and forcing an apartment door open and making their way in. This has raised concerns amongst residents and Colorado state law enforcement officials. The city of Aurora is issuing a statement today in the wake of national attention following the video's release. As we've reported in the past, Tren de Aragua is one of the fastest growing transnational criminal organizations from Venezuela. According to FBI officials, the gang has now infiltrated its way into the United States through various sectors of the U.S.-Mexico border.
Let's take a look at the handful of Venezuelan gangs who are taking over apartments in the United States.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. a handful of problems.
Do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again.
How about a jewelry robbery?
It was extremely violent.
It was this moment caught on camera when Myrna Munoz says she knew something didn't feel right as one man pretended to be shopping, and then these three men sat in the cage waiting to be let into their shop, Joyeria El Ruby.
So the individual that was standing right here pulled a gun, and the three individuals that came in pulled guns.
Customers dropping to their knees, held at gunpoint. Some of the staff fleeing to the back. Munoz able to grab her kids and escape.
My mom and my cousin closed the door as I grabbed my 18-month-old baby.
Her mom, Lydia Tena, tried to hit the panic button before one of the robbers attacked her.
They hit her in the back of her head with the gun 3 times. They also hit my cousin Magdalena in the back of the head.
They are looking for these 8 Hispanic men.
It's organized crime, and their accent is from Venezuela.
Walls now bare and shelves disheveled. This family shaken and scared for the future of their shop.
This is very traumatizing. Sí, tengo mucho miedo. Yes, I'm very scared, and mostly for our kids.
How about giving housing to illegal migrants?
This is Savannah Hernandez in Brunswick, Maine, reporting to you from the apartments where migrants are getting their rent paid for up to 2 years. They come furnished, so they have a flat screen TV in there, couches, tables, and chairs.
And what about the light and the water?
Everything is good. We don't pay anything. These buildings were initially created for Maine residents, but then it was decided that homeless migrants would be living here. A 1-bedroom is going to run you about $1,800, and a 2-bedroom is going to run you about $2,300. This is the same county that has received FEMA funding from that same program that spent almost $1 billion through the fiscal year of 2023 and 2024 on sheltering illegal immigrants throughout the United States of America.
How about giving licenses to illegal migrants?
You shouldn't just write them off as people that can't drive or people that are not talented.
No, I'm not saying that.
They're not written off as people who can't drive. They're active illegal immigrants crossing the border who have never driven a car in their lives, who are then being granted licenses. In Springfield, Ohio, you had so many Haitian immigrants given the ability to drive that they're running into trash cans, they're hitting other people. You had an 11-year-old boy who died last year because he was hit by a Haitian immigrant. These are active problems that I think not enough people think about when we're having the conversation about assimilation.
It sounds really good, and you feel morally superior when you're able to sit there and say, well, you're encouraging discrimination against these migrants by saying that they can't drive. Tell that to Aiden's parents.
Yeah.
My great uncle was killed by an illegal immigrant who was drunk driving. What did he die for? You know, for your ideology, so you could feel morally superior by telling me I'm discriminating by saying that they can't drive. That's not going to bring my great uncle back. This is real stuff. The consequences are real, and that's why people care. And yeah, it might not be comfortable to hear, but the truth isn't comfortable.
What about paying for businesses for illegals?
Back in 2019, I purchased my first food truck. It cost me over $25,000. I paid it cash money. I worked hard to pay for this truck. I'm now selling it. I had a guy come to look at purchasing my food truck. He explained to me he's an illegal immigrant. He has no credit. He has no money in the bank. But he showed me his paperwork that he will receive funds to purchase my food truck. How do I work so hard to have somebody who comes to this country, no credit, and he shows me paperwork where they'll be funding him money to buy my food truck? It's not right, and I want answers.
How about FEMA spending money on illegal migrants as opposed to United States citizens?
Many Americans are suffering, many even losing their lives. And who's tasked with helping those struggling Americans? FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But it seems as though FEMA has created a second disaster of sorts. And it might just be because they're apparently focusing their efforts on illegal immigrants. This is something that the current administration is actually trying to deny.
Former President Trump is accusing the Biden administration of using FEMA funding to support undocumented migrants. How is the White House responding to that?
I mean, it's just categorically false.
It is not true. Funding is also available through FEMA's Emergency Food and Shelter Program to eligible local governments, non-for-profit organizations upon request to support humanitarian relief for migrants.
FEMA is going to be playing a pivotal role in our shelter and services program that is poised to distribute $363 million to cities and communities in need of funding.
FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season.
Let's take a look at sex trafficking.
Hispanic and African American communities being exploited, used, and abused under the greatest slavery in the history of the world. My friend Ben Carson, who's also a friend of the president, said there's more slaves in the world today than in the history of the world. And why is that? Because the only industry that's flourished over the last 4 years is human trafficking and drugs. We are not just inviting people in, we're bringing people in. Let's ask some of the NGOs. We are actively bringing people to this country for exploitation, millions of people. Last year, on April 26, 2023, Tara Lee Rodas testified before Congress that the U.S. is a middleman in the trafficking of children. Last year, there were 85,000 children lost. Not lost, they were sold. In my opinion, they were sold.
Why'd you fly thousands of miles to Guatemala, and what did you find? I understand it's like one of the biggest scandals anyone has ever heard of, and you're here to save children's lives. Tell us about it, Joe.
You know, I was asked to come down there to report on a nonprofit organization based in the U.S., and this nonprofit organization is called Save the Children. It does everything but save the children, it seems. But they were trafficking children that were ending up being raped, murdered, disappearing as they come into the U.S., not by the hundreds, but by the thousands. These are Guatemalan children. Wow. So I went down there to speak with the Attorney General and to speak with the Secretary General of the public sector or the public ministry, and was able to review information. There was a 136-page document that was sent to Ken Paxton a few days before that, and they wanted to shed a light on what is happening in Guatemala and what is really happening at the border as they use this kind of migrant path in order to basically have their way with young children.
By everybody's estimation, the union, retired chiefs, everybody that's in the business knows that the cartels own the border 100%. Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Imagine what's going to happen when we try to go back and get it back. It's going to be all-out war. Mm-hmm. So you have the trafficking of fentanyl, the trafficking of men, women, and children. Children trafficking right now, because of this open border, has now gotten to the point where it's more lucrative than selling guns and drugs. You can sell a kid 5 times a day for 15 years. Mm-hmm. You sell a drug and a gun once. So now the cartels, who used to make their biggest money on drugs, now are making their biggest money on human trafficking.
And how about the security of our border in general?
The American dream has become a nightmare because they'll go to these towns and cities that already have their controlled areas of cartel-controlled, gang-controlled. So the cartels are now taking visible control. LA, Washington, Chicago, New York, visible control. So these people have to report to somebody. The cartel has all their information, and now they got to find a way to pay that $7, $8, $15, $20,000, depending on how they came in. And now they have to pay either it's sex or it's labor or it's something. Mm-hmm. And you have that whole segment in society, and the compassion, the party of compassion, doesn't care less where they end up, as long as visibly they're seen as coming in. They've kept their campaign promises, open borders.
80% of the United States border is completely unmanned. 1,600 miles of the 2,000-mile border does not have a single Border Patrol agent on it. We are estimating between 15 and 18 million illegal aliens have crossed the border undetected and absconded. We have no idea who they are. None. But I do know who are the 12 million. I do know inside the 12 million that we have arrested the Border Patrol, over 250,000 of them are special interest aliens who are otherwise known as terrorists, and they have been released into America. Millions of gang members have been released into America. PLA soldiers by the tens of thousands have entered the United States of America and been released. This is all data that CBP puts out. These are not my numbers. These are theirs. That is how dangerous, how vulnerable America is.
The United States Border Patrol recently endorsed Donald Trump to be President of the United States. What does that tell you about how Kamala Harris has done being in charge of the border?